Hey everybody, it's Colin Ellis here and welcome to another culture and coffee podcast coming to you today from the Supreme Coffee Roastery in Abbotsford in the north suburbs of Melbourne. Actually cycled here. It's a beautiful cycle. There's cycle paths everywhere in Melbourne, which is just fabulous. And as someone who likes to get away, I like David Attenborough's quote on this: if I can bicycle, I bicycle. And there are days when I get up when I feel as old as David Attenborough as well. But I love that, the fact that you can just literally cycle everywhere, and from the house, from the place that we're renting, it's about a 30-minute cycle here. And it takes you along kind of through the woodlands, along railway lines, and then ultimately along the Yarra River, which is the main river that runs through Melbourne. I've already been here and seen pictures. And it's just such a beautiful cycle along the river. It's so peaceful. It was when I cycled here, so peaceful. You just don't feel like you're anywhere near a big city. It's so great. And save for the grandparents who were shouting at their grandkids near the children's farm. It was just a beautiful thing. Grandparents doing what they do best, forgetting that they were children themselves once. Speaking of those things, of course. So yes, thank you for joining me this morning. Yes, and so Abbotsford's a great little suburb here. So the coffee shop is right next to the roastery itself. There's all kinds of noises going on here. It's just around the corner from the brewery as well, the Carlton and United Brewery. So it's kind of densely populated with like old warehouses, old buildings, and this is such a great little spot. I often feel like going into a good coffee shop sometimes. It's almost like stepping into a chemistry lab. They've got all this gear and equipment, and everything looks so beautiful and polished. And this is just one of those great little spots. And I ordered a pour over. So where they pour the hot water literally over the grind in the filter paper, it drips through, and they serve it in this beautiful little jug. I might post a picture of it actually. LinkedIn or the Culture Makers community. If you've not joined us on the community yet, what are you doing? Culturemakers.community. You can join for free. Where we discuss more than just what we discuss on the podcast. And so the coffee that I'm drinking is from Guatemala. You guys all know your geography. Guatemala is sandwiched between Mexico and El Salvador, and Honduras as well, I think. So it's kind of almost right underneath Mexico, in that thin bit of Central America, before you get to the thinnest bit. And we all know that Panama is the thinnest bit. How do you know that Panama is the thinnest bit? Because that's where we gouged a massive canal so that people can travel between the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific. So Guatemala, famous for its Mayan culture, and apparently there's sites everywhere, not that I've been. And this particular coffee, I've got my coffee card here, is a Kalibus. So it has notes of citrus and stone fruit. I love these little cards. Sierra de las Minas mountain range, southeast islands, rich in biodiversity, and the coffee is grown there. So there you go. That's a little bit about your coffee this morning. How you going? How was the weekend? Hope you're all good. Hopefully you're getting the same love and attention today on Monday, Monday the 21st of February, as you got last Monday, on Monday the 14th of February. Don't let your partner forget that every day is a love day, not just the 14th of February. I'm going to talk about learning and development programs today, particularly in relation, obviously, to culture. And I'm asking whether they're up for the job. Because my experience, and I had a ton of it for a while. My experience is they're often not up to the job. And so I want to talk about that. If you're, I'd love to hear your comments on that. If you're not a member of the community, join, or I post the podcast on LinkedIn. You can comment, or you can just send me a message. I'd love to find out what you think. Because learning and development programs traditionally have just all been a bit boring, if I'm honest. They've been a bit boring, and they kind of all right for the basic stuff, but they miss the mark so often. And I think particularly over the last couple of years, because the nature of work has changed and the world of work has changed. Now, when the pandemic first hit in 2020, we had this crazy scenario. And yeah, it is crazy. I'm going to stand behind that statement. It's totally crazy. Where organisations cut their discretionary spend on things like training and development of people, which utterly bonkers. At a time when you needed to build emotional capital with employees, at a time when you need to develop different skill sets, particularly around how you motivate and inspire remote teams, at a time when you need to make sure that people know how to use the tools that you've implemented, they took away all the spend, which is bonkers. Now, I get that there was uncertainty. As I mentioned before, I'm an optimistic realist, so I know that for some businesses they had cost challenges. I'm not talking about spending money willy-nilly. But what the tech companies particularly did, and what the great organisation cultures did, is they doubled down. McKinsey said this in a paper in mid-2020. They said, now is the time to double down on your learning and development spend. Demonstrate to employees that the business doesn't stop. Demonstrate to employees that you're still invested in helping them to change and become something better than they are. Demonstrate that. And of course that means money, and that means time away from the office, and it also means accountability, which we're going to talk about shortly. So I think for too long organisations have built what I would call standard programs, stuff that needs to happen, don't get me wrong, but it's just all delivered in such a standard way that it's immediately forgotten once people get back into kind of the normal day-to-day, if that's the right. I was going to say office, but it's not the office. It's a normal day-to-day routine of work. And so there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about as part of that. And I want to acknowledge Amy Edmondson. I've mentioned Amy in the past. She does a lot of great work and a lot of fantastic research in psychological safety. And I remember reading something that she wrote a couple of years back, I'm paraphrasing now, Amy, where she talked about the fact that one of the biggest reasons that learning and development programs fail is because when they're in a kind of when people are in kind of a classroom, let's say, type environment, or a workshop type environment, you create a different level of safety that isn't present when you go back. So what I mean by that is that people are in the classroom, they see possibility, they come in with a growth mindset, they pick up all of these tips, tricks, and what have you. When they go back to the office, sometimes there's a cynicism of being on a course, like whenever you try something new, or been on a course, have you? We've all been there. I've been on a course. Yes, I have actually. I'm going to apply these new rules, whether you like them or not. And we are going to do this exercise. Let me just get my textbook out. Or else, I can't remember, I don't know what the connecting word is to the sentence because I forgot how I started it, so let's go with or else. Or else, what they're seeing from leaders runs contrary to that you've been taught in the classroom. And so, whenever you're constructing a learning and development program for people and culture professionals, and so whenever you're constructing a learning and development program, you have to ask yourself, what are the conditions right now in which we're developing people? Is it the right time? Do we have the right conditions? And I just had a really interesting client call. So I'm doing 4 tailored leadership development programs at the minute. I'll come to that in a second. And just had an interesting conversation with a potential client about that. And again, really honest. He said, I'm not sure I've got the leadership team right now that can help embed the learning that we take from the program. Fabulous insight. Because that's what you need. You need those people to have a growth mindset. You need those people to not ask people just to dismiss what they've learned. And in fact, what you want the opposite is you want your leadership team to role model and encourage people, which is why, kind of the programs that I run, I always say that the senior leadership team should be part of the sessions that you run. Everyone should get there, because everyone's talking about parity and removing barriers, and you've got a layer of people where everything seems to get stuck. It's the next layer down. I always hear that from senior leaders. It's the next layer down that's the problem. Really? Is it? Did you create idiots or did you hire idiots? If it's the next layer down, which one is it? Of course, you created them. And so I think that, kind of leadership teams need to be part of that. But let's go back to the basics, right? So you have a strategy, you have let's say a 1 to 3 year strategy. Now, as part of that strategy, you need to define, well, what's the culture that we need in order to deliver the strategy. And a big part, you'll have your people and culture plan, you'll have a culture evolution plan, which talks about where you are now. You might want to include your engagement plan as part of that, talk about where you are now, and then where you need to get to, and then the level of work that you're doing to make sure that you get there. I helped an organisation recently with their culture evolution plan, and obviously I did that because my programme was part of it. So they wanted to build in the value, they wanted to build in the kind of what and the how, and also talk about costs and include those as well. So that's all part of it. So you can say, here's the strategy, here's the plan to evolve the culture to meet that. And then the other thing that you need is, okay, in order to ensure that our people have got the skills to deliver our projects and business as usual effectively, such that they're contributing to the culture and we're achieving our goals, what are the things that we need to make sure that they've got the skills that they need to ensure? Now, typically what people in culture HR departments will take a 70-20-10 approach to development, right? So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was the Centre for Creative Leadership or Centre for Creative Learning, I can't remember exactly what their name is. I think they came up with this a bunch of years ago, 20 years ago, the 70-20-10. So 70% is your experience on the job, and this is about you pushing yourself a little bit as well. It's also about you learning outside work, the 70%. So, when you think about bringing your best self to work and your most relevant self to work, kind of what are you doing? What are you doing to stretch yourself? What accountability are you looking to take in order to get better at being you and to get better at your job? 20% then is kind of internal coaching and mentoring. And organisations need to be really good at having these buddy systems to help each other. And they work, when they set up well, they work really, really well. And then the last 10% is obviously about coordinated training programs or facilitated programs. And what can I tell you about that? It's not wrong and it works. I know it worked for me when we took that approach. The 70% works when you actually give people opportunity, though, rather than work. People are like, oh, we've got this great development opportunity for you. We want you to manage this dog's breakfast of a project that no one else wants to manage. Are you good? Like projects as development opportunities, car crash projects as development opportunities. I don't think so. But you've got to recognise, kind of from a personal perspective, what are you not great at? What are the things that you avoid like the plague, and how are you going to get better at them? And part of which is the 10% of tailored development programs, and they have to be tailored because most development programs fail. Because they reckon on average, it's billions spent on development programs. It's anything up to like $150 billion worldwide of development programs. And then there was some research in the US, and I think it was McKinsey's, only found that 7% of leadership development programs were effective. Because people came into it with the wrong mindset. There was a lack of context. So there was no connection to the bigger picture. There weren't any leadership opportunities, so people were like, well, why should I bother? Which then contributed to the mindset. And what they weren't set up in a way where people felt able to contribute, or they ran counter to the culture that existed on that time. The wrong people did them. I still think, I mentioned this before, we promote people into senior management positions based on length of tenure rather than their capability to actually lead. But ultimately, they fail because they're delivered in a way that's not relevant to what they are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Far too many leadership development programs, particularly, or development programs, they're far too contextual. They contain lots of models and lots of theories and lots of statements, and that's all cool, right? It's good as context. But if there's too much context and not enough practical content, then people will be like, it was awesome, I loved it, we learned so much, what can you do differently? Or we can change our meetings from 30 minutes to 20 minutes. What else? That was it. You know? And listen, they may have been given strategies, but, you know, it's really down to the organisation to make sure that they're delivered in a way that means something and that they're actually usable. So for me, there are 3 criteria for successful leadership development programs. Development programs generally. The first thing is measurability, because I think if you're looking for any kind of improvement, you've got to be able to say, this is where we are now, and this is where we want to be, and this is how we're going to track progress. You know, and I know there are those old statements about what gets measured gets managed and all of that kind of stuff, but actually, if you're on one of these programs, you want to know that you're improving. You want to know, otherwise why bother? Otherwise why go on them? Like, you know, if you don't want to measure if you're improving as a human or as a manager or whatever, or your productivity or whatever it is, like, kind of why bother? You're reliant then on your own feeling rather than something that's tangible. So I think that measurability is key. You know, every culture program that I run, I always say to the organisation, make sure that we measure the engagement before and then at regular phases to make sure that it's moving in the direction that we want it to be. So I think that measurability is key. The second thing is the practicability. And so what you've got to do is make sure that people are given tools to enhance the way that they do stuff. I'll give you a great example. So one of the leadership development programs that I'm running was one organisation. We talked about some of the challenges that they faced, and you know, I mentioned emotional intelligence, and the CEO was like, yes, lack of emotional intelligence, that's definitely one thing that we see here. And I said, okay, cool. It's like, is that something you see from the leadership team? Because obviously it was the next tier down. He's like, oh yeah, we see it from the leadership team. I was like, okay, cool. I was like, how do you do empathy? And I caught him off guard a little bit, deliberately so, because I wanted to kind of test, you know, what the level of knowledge was around this stuff. He said, what do you mean, to buy time? I was like, how, you know, you said you're good at emotional intelligence. How do you build empathy? Well, you know, just put yourself in someone else's shoes. I'm like, I know, I know all the phrases, but give me a process. How would you coach someone into helping them to develop empathy? What would you do? What tips would you give them? You know, at that point, it was like, oh, I've never thought of it in that way. And of course we don't. You know, we talk about things like empathy is the number one requirement of managers in 2022. We saw this rise in empathy during the pandemic, which is great. So we've got to be able to give people practical steps. You know, how do you build empathy? Well, empathy requires you put time and effort into it. I'm going to give you the answers, because I know you're like, well, how do you do it, smart arse? It requires you put time and effort into building relationships. It means that you have to listen to the other person. You build empathy through sharing stories. You build empathy through sharing experiences. You build empathy through vulnerability. It's giving a little bit of away about yourself to get to learn the other person. It's simple things like asking how they like to be communicated to. You know, how do you digest information? You know, these are the kind of things to help build empathy. Also, another thing about empathy is, I'm making this podcast all about empathy now. Another thing about empathy is not being quick to judge. How about you just assume that everyone's doing the best that they can do? How about that? Yeah, and that's empathy in action. Is we believe the best of people. So it's things like that. You know, it's little things like that you can do, and they've got to be practical. So when we talk about communication, we'll demonstrate how do I deliver a message to different people in different ways. When we talk about vulnerability, well, what's a framework or what's a mindset you can give me that helps me think about that? When we talk about building psychological safety in teams, well, what does that look like? How do we do that? Is there a charter we can write? What's that tool? You know, we talk about taking risks. Well, how do I assess whether something's a risk, and how do I stay on top of it? All of these things. They're practical tools that you can give people, and even better if the leadership program is created with the people in mind. And so often what I'll do when I'm working with HR departments is we'll engage those people who are going to be, you know, kind of go through the program and say, well, what do you want to know? What's some of our biggest challenges? What I don't want is the leadership team to decide everything on behalf of the people being trained. They've got to have a say as well. What is it that you want to know? And then how can you put it into action? And then the third thing is accountability. Because we want you to have a really great experience on this tailored program that has context, that has great content, that has practical tools that you can use, that you can take and use anywhere. We want all of that. But it all counts for nothing if you don't actually go and do it. It counts for absolutely nothing if you don't leave that room, virtual or physical, and don't do something different immediately. And so these are all the questions that learning and development professionals and HR professionals should be asking, not only themselves, but also when they engage people, to sort of say, okay, well, how are we going to take this? How is this going to be tailored to us? For me, I'd learn, all my clients, I learn their business. I want to be able to deliver things in their language, using their words, their phrases. Different people have different names for their leadership team and their management team, and I want to be able to talk about their key projects. I want to be able to do all of that, because immediately you're sat in the room going, okay, so he's talking about my company here, he's not talking about some generic thing. And I think all of those things, when you construct them in that way, what they lead to is memorability. Like that great Maya Angelou quote, people will forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And your learning and development programs should do that too. Every program should be an experience. Every program should make people want better for themselves and should really drive that desire to change. And then by creating accountability groups, what you've got is people checking into making sure there are no barriers in the way, such that people can achieve everything that they've set out to do. Ultimately, when you do great learning and development programs, you create a pipeline of people who are not only loyal to the organisation, but they're able to demonstrate the values in plain sight. They're able to live with purpose, and in those scenarios, everybody wins. All right, that's it for your podcast today. Hope you've enjoyed it. See you next time. Ta-ra for now.